This video is made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mario Moreira, who's going to talk about building true customer value-driven enterprise. Mario.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Agile New England, for hosting this great event and honoring me with this opportunity to present tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be focusing on building a true customer value-driven enterprise. How many think here that they actually are working in a company that is a true Agile customer value-driven enterprise? Raise your hand. Okay, so hopefully there should be a couple of hands, but more than likely this is on the cusp of many companies. They're explored Agile for a while, and they may not be driving the business benefits that they hope they have, and a large part of that is because it needs to happen throughout the enterprise, not just the mechanics, but the mindset. So welcome to Building a Customer Value-Driven Enterprise, which really focuses on building a customer value-driven engine for your organization. As mentioned, I'm Mario Moreira. I'm a Master Agile Coach for Vistaprint, where we have embarked for several years on a customer-driven enterprise transformation. We're focusing on Agile, and it's going pretty well. We're in about the third or fourth year of it, and we are exploring a lot of what it takes to run an enterprise at the Agile enterprise level. I'm also a writer for the Agile Adoption Roadmap blog at cmforagile.blogspot.com. I've written a number of books in the field. What you just heard is I just released a new book called The Agile Enterprise, which actually encompasses a lot of the material here. There will be copies available at the end of the session. Joining me today are two of my colleagues, David Grabel and J.B. Beaudry, who both have contributed chapters to this book and are also well entrenched in what it takes to have a customer value-driven enterprise, applying a lot of Agile methods, mindsets, techniques, and concepts. This session today is to give you a vision of where you can go. It is not intended to go deep, but give you a number of touch points on what your next step might be. Because just like the way we've approached Agile at Vistaprint, we use an incremental approach, no surprise, which is very Agile, where you focus on what is the next high-value components of Agile that your organization needs in the next increment. And we've applied that and it works well. The goal for you guys is to come away with what might be your next increment to get your company to be customer value-driven, totally Agile enterprise. So some people ask me, why am I doing this session? And even why am I even thinking about this material and so forth? The very first reason is there's little visibility and transparency of top ideas being worked on in a company. I've been a consultant for many companies, and this seems to be true in many of them. Well, let me ask a question to you guys. How many of you have a hard time finding the list of top ideas being worked on across your company? Could you easily find that list, or is it very hard? How many of you find this very hard to do? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands go up. This is not uncommon. Another reason why I'm focusing on this topic is companies are not actually truly aware of the value of the work that's going on. So let me ask you another question. Have you ever been in a company where some teams are working on low-value work? Okay, I would hope to see most of your hands up, and in fact, I do. Unfortunately, you find yourselves in great company. Even when there is actually high-value work that's just waiting in the pool, that can actually generate the company a lot of money. Here are 3 ideas that are just sitting there that are each worth over $2 million to the company that are waiting and waiting. Have any of you experienced this, where great ideas are just sitting there waiting while the low-value work is occurring? Raise your hand. Again, a lot of hands are going up. Wouldn't it be better if you worked at a company where only the highest value work was being worked on, and you had the ability to cut the tail of the lower value work? In addition, few can connect their team work to the enterprise strategy and top ideas. How many of you can easily connect your current tasks to the corporate strategy? Raise your hand. Just a few of you. Because oftentimes there is a disconnect between what's happening on teams. Oftentimes as a consultant or as a coach, I'll go to teams, hey, do you know how your work connects to the strategy? And people can talk about their work, but not necessarily how to connect it. In addition, there's too much focus on big batches, where upwards of 60% of the features are rarely or never used. How many of you have worked on a product, service, or affinity of some sort where much of the product isn't going to get used? Raise your hand. Right? And what's the big issue when you build that whole thing? What else do you need to do once you build it? You have to maintain it, right? You have to keep it up and running and spend a lot of resources on that. How many of you would like to avoid building that whole thing and instead just build the high value pieces? Wouldn't that be awesome? And then finally, for many of us, Agile is only occurring in parts of the organization. How many of you see Agile occurring in only part of your organization? Raise your hand. Okay, again, lots of hands go up. And in fact, if you look at this example or representation of an enterprise, on the one axis is the delivery axis, the ideas come in, and on the other end, it gets released. The hierarchical axis, the teams are here, and the management is up here. How many of you see this type of Agile occurring, where it's occurring on the teams and pretty much nowhere else? Raise your hand. Okay, some hands go up. Wouldn't it be better if Agile looked like this? Across the enterprise, across the delivery axis, and top to bottom in the hierarchy. So we know the problem, but the question is, what do we do now? How do we ensure all parts of the enterprise are connected and aligned to the highest value work? Welcome the customer value-driven engine. This is an engine that provides you an end-to-end view of how ideas flow through your enterprise. It gives you the ability to adapt. When a new high-value idea comes in, you can actually see it, and it will float to its highest value, and you'll be able to pull that one in short order instead of letting it sit there for maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year. It also ensures teams know the highest value enterprise work. It provides visibility and transparency to the work, always allowing you to quickly adapt to that new incoming work. And it's a more adaptable way of managing the work and responding to feedback. There are several parts to a customer value-driven engine. The first part is that delivery axis we just talked about, being aware how work flows through. You should also have an enterprise Kanban. That's a Kanban board, but at the enterprise level. In addition, you should have a way to record the idea. I'm not talking business case level where it's fat and thick or a big spec, but enough to understand what that idea is. In addition, you should have the ability to cut an increment to avoid the big batch thinking and that work that can completely overload a team for a long period of time. In addition, of course, your backlog of user stories. These are all connected. However, what should not surprise you is if you are truly understanding of Agile, there is more than mechanics in play. There is also the mindset that needs to be activated. And this mindset will include the discovery mindset, your ability to incorporate things like design thinking, experimental thinking, incremental thinking, understanding the importance of feedback loops. Even if you think the idea is high value, you better be getting customer feedback along the way. In addition, concepts like self-organizing teams, and of course, embracing the values and principles. These go hand in hand, the mechanics and the mindset. To better understand the engine, let's talk about what I refer to as the 6R model. This is a model that helps you understand the flow of work from the moment you record the idea to when you release and reflect on it. I call this the end-to-end flow. A very quick example, and we're going to get into a much more interactive example. You see you've gotten a lot of handouts, so a lot of this workshop is going to be you experimenting and exploring with many of these concepts today. So in this case, record is when the moment you would actually record the idea, but not like the old days where it might be a lot of work. In this case, it's actually very lean to understand the idea. Then we would reveal it, and it would be revealed with a priority, or actually a value, and it would float to the value in the pool where it should be. So in other words, if it's a very high value, it floats to the top of that pool. So those that float to the middle or below the pool, do you think you should invest any more time with that idea? Anyone? Yeah, probably not. However, if it is of high value, then you would invest more time in exploring that idea. This is to get us away from a lot of the big upfront requirements gathering that we do, of which, and it's been proven by studies, that upwards of 64% is either never used or rarely used. So we want to move away from that. Once you get to refine, refine is when there's a pull signal that can take that idea and cut an increment. From there, that increment gets moved to realize. Another interpretation of realize is development, where development actually works on it. This is where you might incorporate things like Scrum, XP, Kanban. It goes to release, and then reflect is when we want to ensure that it wasn't the value that we thought, and we would come back to record and reveal to inform whether that idea still holds the value that we thought it did. Any questions at this point? Why don't we start back there?
So at the time of recording the value of an idea, what's the criteria used to establish what the value is?
Yes, that's a very good question, and you're going to learn that in just a few minutes. In fact, my colleague David is going to talk through how to get to that value. Let's go with David.
In the case that you find that during reflection the value wasn't what you expected, what do you do to figure out why the value wasn't what it was expected and how you can avoid that mistake in the future?
Very good question. So in this case, we'd use reflect in a number of different ways, and we'll explore that in more detail, but at a very quick level, it would be things such as you'd be collecting market data, and then you'd have a retrospective on that data to see where we might have had assumptions that we didn't actually explore enough, or there were risks that we knew that we didn't explore enough. And we bring that back in to record and reveal, because if we just cut an increment, then the rest of that idea is still there for us to determine whether the value is higher or lower now. Okay?
Is there a mechanism in there for urgent lower value things?
Sure. So what you're talking about is, because we're applying the use of an enterprise Kanban, if you understand the concepts of Kanban, you may actually have an urgent lane. However, I would say use that with discretion, right? It shouldn't be misused. Okay, why don't we move forward? Now we're going to put our engine into action. So everyone should have a couple of spreadsheets in front of them. The first is a lean canvas, what I call a customer value canvas. You're going to work with that one. It looks like this. We have now entered the record phase. Here is where you capture your idea. This is where you capture your idea. So the benefit of this engine is you can use any type of methodology or model through each of these phases, which is another difference between this and most other models. It doesn't tie you into anything. So for record, one of my recommendations is you use something like a lean canvas to capture. What you see in front of you, though, is an adapted version of the lean canvas. Here's an example of many of the pieces in your lean canvas. First, you have the opportunity. Let's say you have a great idea. So you capture that in the opportunity or problem you want to solve. From there, you might then create a hypothesis of what you think you might want to build. At that point, you may decide, well, who am I building this for? And you'll focus on customer personas. Which personas are you building this for? From there, you see a lot of other areas or attributes, such as the cost of delay, the increment, the feedback loops, assumptions and risks. And what I have found is the best way for you to learn about this particular tool is to actually try it. So with that in mind, I'd like you to think of a business idea that you've had in your head. It could either come from work or something at home. A business idea, either something at work or something that you've thought about at home. And I want you to capture the idea or the problem that you may have in the opportunity box. Can everybody find the opportunity box? In addition, document the idea. So first it's the business idea, so document the idea in the opportunity box. Then go to the customer persona box and document what persona you think it would be for. And then in addition, what feedback loops might you need? So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to do a dog grooming business. I have, my neighbors are all complaining about their dogs. They're totally unruly, their hair needs cut. So my idea is a dog grooming business. The persona would be dog owners, right? Or maybe a certain type of dog owner that is very particular about the beauty of their pet. So that would be the type of persona or person. And then the feedback loop, can anyone give me some ideas of what feedback loop should come along with this then? What feedback loops would I use? Anyone?
Dog's gonna bite you.
Dog bites you? I guess that's a feedback loop. What else? What feedback loops might I want to capture?
Clean dog.
Yeah, see if the dog is clean at the end of the thing. Are you getting feedback from the owner and did they say this was good or not? What's that? Repeat customers. That would be other feedback loops. Very good. Anything else? Customer referrals. So that would be another example of a feedback loop. So let's spend about 5 minutes. I'd like you to think of an idea, maybe something that's been on your mind or something that's in your company right now, a big piece of work that's going to happen or you'd like to happen. Capture that as the business idea in the opportunity box, right? The personas in the persona box, and then the feedback loops in the feedback loops box. Okay, let's spend 5 minutes. And feel free to work in pairs. Actually, why don't you buddy up with someone? Buddy up with someone, work in pairs. I have the example back up here, so if you want to do any last minute documentation, let's try to wrap it up within the next minute and then we'll move on. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to David Grabel, who's going to walk us through Reveal and explore with us the concepts of cost of delay and CD3. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Mario. Okay, so as Mario pointed out, during Reveal, that's where we want the high priority ideas to float to the top and identify the ones that are really, really worth investing in and working on. And good question was, how do you determine that? Well, we'll give you some ideas on how to do that. So the key is to focus on this corner of the palette, which is cost of delay and value score. So the first thing about cost of delay is what we're trying to figure out is if you're late to market, if you miss your deadlines or you miss your target date, how much money is it going to cost the company? Because that's the reason to choose to invest in anything. If you're a profit-driven company like most of us are working for, then we want to make it as obvious what the actual real value is. We want to look at what the delay cost would be. Okay? And there are four primary sources of the cost of delay. The one that everybody thinks of is incremental revenue. We're going to sell this product, we're going to introduce it to the market, and we're going to generate a certain amount of new sales. That's the most obvious one. In some cases, you have to protect revenue. So you're doing well with your first release, your competitors are starting to catch up to you. You want to come up to surpass them. So the second one is protecting revenue. The other two are cost related, and sometimes these can be even more valuable. Right? Sometimes it's reduced cost. It might be automate a process. It might be to find a more efficient way of doing things, but that can be a valuable item. And the last point, which sometimes can be a very, very big item, is avoiding costs. Right now, in my organization, on our enterprise board, our second highest priority in the entire organization is a compliance regulation, because if we don't change the way in which we deliver emails, we're going to be in violation of new EU regulations going into effect in July, and we'll be subject to a $20 million fine. Right? So that's pretty high priority. And we're pretty confident we're going to meet that one. So let's look at one particular example where we'll focus on two of the more obvious parts. We have a new idea that's going to, first of all, we're going to protect revenue by avoiding customer attrition. And we have a pretty good idea that this is going to be worth about $14,400,000 per year. And a second, it's also going to generate new revenue, and we pretty sure that that's going to generate $21,600,000 of revenue. Now, the underlying models by which you get to these assumptions, that's going to vary company to company. A lot of it is just MBA 101, but each of your companies will have a process to take assumptions about the marketplace to come up with these numbers. So if you look at these on a weekly basis, the protect revenue is about $277,000 per week, and the gain new customers is going to give you about $415,000 a week. So the total cost of delay for this project per week is a little more than $692,000. The next thing we want to look at during the reveal process is a value score. We call it CD3. It's the cost of delay divided by duration. You come up with what we call a dream duration. I'm not trying to account for meetings. It's not looking at every, the most accurate estimate. But as long as you have a consistent process for estimating dream duration, that's what you're going to get here. So in this case, in this particular example, the dream duration was 6 weeks. So our value score, CD3, is 693,000 divided by 6, which gives us a value score of $115,000. Now, by applying cost of delay, this is one of the key ways in which we can focus on the high value items. Okay? Focus on the higher value work because you've identified where that high value is, and if a new item comes in that's even higher value, you can switch over to it and add that quickly. Additionally, you can cut the tail on the low value work because you now have a mechanism to provide some subjective, objective work and apply some of these rationales and come up with a rationale for why to cut the high value, cut the tail.
Is the horizontal axis time?
The horizontal axis is actually the number of projects. So each one here is a idea, and each point on the y-axis is its cost of delay, and they're just ordered by the value. So it's just individual projects ordered by value. And it's just the number, each one has an incremental number.
So this profile looks kind of interesting. Do other companies have a profile that might look like this?
I know of at least 2. The original data was done for a big shipping company in Europe called Maersk, where they came up with a profile that looked like this. And it's documented in a book about black swan farming. You can look at the Black Swan Farming website. And we did the same exercise in our company with our projects, our cost of delay, and the shape of the curve was identical. The numbers were different, of course, but the shape of the curve was identical. And we've seen this over and over again, that as more and more companies apply it, this becomes a very typical pattern. And it would probably correlate, based on some of the questions you answered, you probably find similar things in your organization.
So how do you deal with time frames? Because some ideas might be deliverable in 6 months and some are in 6 years or more.
In terms of getting to the value score, that's where the dream duration comes in. So you have, in that case, you have one has a dream duration of 6 weeks, one has a dream duration of 26 weeks. That becomes the denominator. Right now it's the cost of delay, but the CD3 score that I talked about will help you evaluate and account for that.
Question over here.
You said if you're working on something and a higher value item comes in, you'll stop work?
Using the Agile approach, what I would do is the current work is in some cadence. So if you're doing sprints, it's like a 2-week cadence. I would complete that work and then switch to the next point. However, if it was truly fundamentally different and was going to make a big difference, then you can always go through the sprint cancellation ceremony. And I don't know if anybody's gotten that in their CSM training, of the ceremony for canceling a sprint. But you could always do that and say, we've got something else that's of so much higher value that continuing to invest in this low value work isn't worth it, and we should stop it. So it's a choice you have to make. Do you let the team finish the current iteration, or do you just stop it and switch? Depends on.
So if you get a continuing procession of higher value things to start, it may be that a lot of time will pass and you'll finish nothing.
If you have that much vulnerability in your market, well, that's why we do small increments, so you can get something done. You got a question over there?
I guess not so much of a question as a assist with an answer, is that that's why this formula is set up that way, is that if you have all huge batch size stuff, it never gets prioritized. You prioritize the smaller stuff that can actually get done.
So we want to do an exercise now. Let's go back to the sheets that you just worked on. Okay. And we want you to determine how much money your idea might make in a year. Okay. So you've got some wonderful, great idea, you've got some understanding of your market. Estimate how much money you might make in a year. Okay. And then calculate the cost of delay by dividing by 52 weeks, by 52. Okay. Then determine the duration of the work, the dream duration. And then calculate the CD3 score by taking this cost of delay and dividing by duration. Okay, so dream duration is your estimate of how long it's going to take to implement this idea. Okay? And we call it dream duration because we're not going to try to account for meeting time or vacations or things like that. The important thing with these numbers, right, it's not the accuracy, right, because we're only looking for order of magnitude differences. The key thing we're trying to figure out here is the important thing is to have a consistent approach. If you do it consistently, then you'll be able to compare between different good ideas and find the ones that are clearly of higher value. So we don't have to spend an enormous amount of time making this super accurate, but it is important that we do it consistently. The question is, how do you prevent people from gaming the system by putting in outrageously high numbers just to get their project prioritized? And Mario will talk to that right after I'm finished. So as you wrap up, make sure you write down your cost of delay and value score in the box on your canvas. So here are some examples of things that we've revealed, right, where one example could be a cost of delay, a CD3 score of 115,000, and the other two are a lot closer. One is 17,000, one is 19,000. The question is, how do you the ones that are the large order of magnitude difference, those are the ones you really want to just pick and put high up there. When you want to distinguish between things that are close, that's where you've got to get in, dig deeper, and now Mario will continue and tell you a little bit about how to dig deeper.
So prioritization, cost of delay, CD3, is a lot of math. Do you think, though, you should only operate based on whatever the number you get? Or do you think maybe it's better than to use that as a basis for conversation? Okay, how many of you have ever heard the saying that a user story, when a user story gets generated, it is actually the beginning of a conversation, right? The same thing with the CD3 score and cost of delay. This is just meant to begin the conversation. Because in the situation where you have 17,000 versus 19,000, if you were doing straight math, you'd pick the 19,000. However, at this point, the way to ensure things don't get gamed is you need to start challenging assumptions. So there's several things that are going to happen here. I see 17 versus 19, and first thing I might do is say, oh, the idea that's 19,000 will take 52 weeks to do, The one with 17,000 will take me 8 weeks. Which do you think I should do? The 8 weeks. However, if you get a value score of 115,000, which is an order of magnitude higher, you're probably going to start there. You still need to have the discussion, and the whole point of CD3 value score is to get you to understand as an order of magnitude which ideas are far higher in value than others. Okay? So at this point, we would start challenging the underlying assumptions. Let's say, for example, remember that dog grooming business I just talked about? I said it's going to generate $21 million a year, so its CD3 score is pretty high. However, if you then challenged my assumption, saying, how did you get to that number? And I said, well, I assumed there were at least 1 million dogs in my neighborhood. Right? Does that sound funny? Well, guess what? When you start delving deep into people's underlying assumptions, you're going to see funny numbers like that too. And so this is where I would have a dialogue with you and say, well, it's not 1 million dogs that are in the area, it's more like 20,000 dogs. And so that would lower my CD3 score. The same could be, the inverse can be true. Let's say I'm building a product for LinkedIn. Let's say I'm printing a Vistaprint printed business card that'll extract the data from your LinkedIn site and generate a business card for you. Well, if I'm starting with the assumption that there's only 2 million LinkedIn users, and when I create my CD3 value score, and you tell me, no, there's actually, like 34 million people that use LinkedIn, or maybe 300 million, then my CD3 value score goes up. And that means it might be worth more than I thought it did. Okay? So the CD3 score, it's important to calculate consistently so you have a rank ordered list, but you're also aware that if one is 15,000 and one is 15,000 and one is 1,000, you want to be aware of the order of magnitude higher value work. And that value curve that we've showed you a couple times, you want to be able to find what we call the black swan ideas, the very rare high value ideas that, guess what? Many companies, when we repeat that value curve for other companies, we're finding that they're literally sitting on their highest value idea. It's just waiting because they're working on the lower value work. Has anyone ever experienced that? Where you're just sitting on the highest value work? Some heads nodding. So what we want to do instead is the next part, and this is where the Agile mindset comes into play, is your company should have a culture of challenging assumptions and being totally objective about it, because you're trying to understand if the underlying assumptions of which you calculated your cost of delay and CD3 score are in fact honest. And you should be able to have that ability within your company to say, hey Tom, where did you get that number? Remind me how you got that. What led you to that conclusion? What were some of the areas that were uncertain? And you explore that conversation together. And in this case, whoever's owning that process of looking through the ideas should be willing to have that discussion. So with that, if you turn over your lean canvas, you see the high value, open-ended questions that will help you challenge assumptions. What I'd like you to do is turn to your partner, turn to your pair, take a look at their CD3 score. Well, first take a minute and document the assumptions you used to get to the value of your idea. Document your assumptions. Take a minute and document your assumptions, then pair up with someone and share your assumptions, and the other person should challenge the assumptions using the high-value, open-ended questions. Okay, so let's spend about 5 minutes in doing that. Okay. So, what did you guys encounter when you were challenging assumptions? Anyone want to share what you encountered when you were challenging assumptions of the data?
Feel we don't have enough data.
Okay, you feel you not have enough data. But do keep in mind, if this idea floats to the top, then you can invest a little bit more time to get that. But if it was a number that the cost of delay and stuff, if it was low, then it would just sit there and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But the moment it floats to the top, it's worth us investing more time into this. And this is what differentiates the customer value-driven engine from others. You don't do it for all of them. You do it only for those high-value ones, and when they come in, and only if they float to the top. Okay, we have a question way over there.
So what if you have poor assumptions and your black swan flows to the bottom and you never notice it because you never had a discussion?
Yeah. This is where one of the hardest challenges organizations have is, in fact, learning how to have a mature, challenging assumptions as well as calculating cost of delay. This is something that worked on. Maybe when I was talking about increments, like your organization may go through an increment, maybe what you do early on is you pair up with someone so you're both working on that cost of delay CD3 and you challenge each other's assumptions. So those are kind of techniques we would do to get through that, because you're right, early on, we're all new to this. We may not necessarily get it right, but the more you pair up with people, like we would pair up product owners and things like that, functional manager with a product owner, a portfolio manager with a product owner, things like that, to start helping us get that right. And then over time, it becomes easier and easier. In fact, the cost of delay CD3 scores takes minutes. Because what also happens when you challenge assumptions is over time, your organization will actually build an assumptions matrix, which means, for example, at Vistaprint, we have known click-through rates. When we put out a coupon, we have data that tells you what our click-through rate is. So then now we have that data, so we build that right into our cost of delay and CD3 scores, as opposed to guessing. So what I'm telling you is the whole practice of cost of delay, CD3 scores, and challenging assumptions mature over time. And that's something you'd have to work on for sure. Okay, good. Okay, so now, after we've got to that point, let's say we have a healthy idea that's floated to the top, we've challenged assumptions, and we're ready to go. Now we get ready to move into refine. And with that, I'd like to introduce JP Beaudry, who's going to walk us through what is happening in refine.
Thank you, Mario. Good evening, everyone. It is great to be back here at Agile New England. It's been far too long for me. So indeed, the basic question is, why not jump straight into execution, or as we call it in the 6R model, realization of an idea? Why bother with an extra step called refinement? There must be a point to it, right? You've actually, in fact, answered that point early on in this presentation. When Mario asked, how many of you have ever worked on a project where there was tremendous energy from the get-go, right? Because this project was going to change the world in your organization. And then as time goes on and you reach the end, then reality sets in that sometimes the results might be a little lackluster or maybe a little bit disappointing. Well, a lot of you raised your hands, and guess what? I have my hand raised just as well, because it's happened to me quite a number of times in my career. And that's why we want to go through refinement, because just as I look back into my own career, and I suspect into yours, as to what actually took place, what was lacking was incremental thinking. Let me explain that. The traditional manner of executing an idea is to do a lot of big upfront thinking, right? We devise a very detailed plan. And then once we have that plan, we believe that if we only follow it to the end, that will bring us to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Well, I guess that's one way to execute, but for me, it doesn't always work super well. The alternative, of course, is, as we've already discussed, building the idea piece by piece and getting feedback along the way. That's really the key piece, right? You want to build an increment of your idea, go to your customers, your stakeholders, the market, whatever it is you're trying to prove, where you try to validate your hypothesis of value, and get that feedback. And as you build increments, it gives you a chance to course correct along the way and more closely hit the bullseye of customer value. This really is critical because, as you know, there's a big difference between plans and reality. So we call that minding the gap. Now, before going further with some theory, we're going to get right back into practice. Now that we're convinced that working incrementally is a good thing, how do we do that? So turn your attention back to your customer value canvas. There's a box in the bottom left corner called increment. And I would like you to take just a couple of minutes to document at least 3 different ways that you could slice off an increment of your idea and bring that to conclusion before the rest of it. Get writing. That takes a little thinking. And allow me to continue to give a little voiceover so that you have a little bit of guidance for how to do that. For some of you, maybe there's a piece of your idea that contains the bulk of the value. That's the thing people are willing to pay for, that stakeholders are dying to have. Try to bring that to conclusion first. For others, your biggest challenge may be risk. Maybe your organization or your team is being asked to do something for the very first time. Heck, maybe the requirements are asking you to break the laws of physics. And you just can't do that, right? Or maybe you can, I don't know. But you should try that first. Because if you can't cross that bridge, what's the point of building the rest? For others, your biggest challenge is to get either financial or political support for your idea. Maybe you have a VIP somewhere, right, who's your the person that supports you. That person, I'm sure, has an opinion, has some thoughts as to what they want to see. Might you want to cater to that person just a little bit in your first increment so that you continue to have support? With all the dangers that come with trying to satisfy an internal persona to the company, because that's not the person paying the bills ultimately, right? The customers are. It's still a good idea to maintain support so that the project may continue. So those are but 3 prisms through which you can look at your idea. In the book, we describe 6. That should give you a sense for how you can go about slicing your idea. So how about that? A couple of minutes to document 3 ideas, how to create increments of your big idea? Let's do it. All right, thank you all. I see some boxes filled, very nice. Not so easy, is it? Who wish there was a more formal technique for getting that done? For slicing, creating increments. All right, well, whether you want it or not, here it comes. Tonight we want to introduce you to the concept of story mapping. This is a technique that was popularized by a gentleman named Jeff Patton. He has a fantastic book. If at the end of this, which is just a super brief introduction to the topic, you find it useful, by all means, grab his material. It's really great. The story map has a few different purposes, but the first one, of course, is to help you break down big, juicy ideas into smaller increments that will help you see if your hypothesis of value is confirmed, right? Well, remember, it's always an hypothesis until it's fully built. There are no facts about the future. The other thing that story mapping does for you is it allows you to keep track of the big picture. How often do you see a long, flat backlog of ideas and then you really don't know what the whole thing is about, right? It gets lost in the details. Before I show you how to build one at hyper speed, let me show you what it looks like when it's done. Here's an example that you can't read. You're welcome. But it is about a company that wants to go about building an email program. The story map is read left to right and top to bottom. The first 2 rows describe what is known as the user experience journey. So for an email program, at the most basic level, it's something like compose emails, read and manage emails, and then manage your contacts, right? More or less, we're all familiar with that. But you could break that down. Those are the pink stickies, by the way. The blue ones simply go to a finer level of granularity. And then below that, aligned with the various blue stickies, which are the activities, the story map asks you to put down the various options that you have for how to bring to life that experience. Here's an example. You wouldn't think of deleting an email as something that has a lot of options in it, do you? But in fact it does, because for most of us, when we hit the delete button, the email doesn't just go poof, right? It actually goes into a different folder that you need to empty a second time, or from which you can retrieve your email if you made a mistake. Somebody somewhere had to decide that this was an option that was more valuable than simply having the email disappear. So in fact, there are plenty of options. Then of course, the last step in the story map is to declare and document and increment. This thing that you're going to bring to the end and start to give you some feedback on the value of your idea. Now, how might you build such a thing? First and foremost, a story map is a group exercise. You want to bring together at least a representative from all the kinds of people you're going to need to build the thing. You need some expertise, because more brains lead to better outcomes. To make sure that you hear from all the voices, we typically recommend that you start with a silent period of brainstorming, where people will be writing down what they think are different pieces of the customer journey. And then you end up with a ton of them, which is great. That's what you want. Usually you'll have a facilitator who will then help bring together some affinities, because of course people will have very similar ideas and whatnot. And then you regroup them by affinity. You remove duplicates, you refine the language, and so forth. Out of that, the team will then extract the customer journey activities, right? These steps of write emails, read emails, manage contacts, and so forth, that will emerge. If your story map is very large, which sometimes it is, because your customer journey is complex, you might want to extract a level at a higher granularity, which Jeff Patton calls the backbone. This helps you keep track of the big picture a little bit better. Now the easy part is done. In the next phase, you're going to get to exercise your skills of communication, patience, compromise, and consensus. This is when you set about prioritizing the various options for the different activities. How you're going to do that depends entirely on your idea and the hypothesis of value that you have. It depends on the prism you're going to choose to slice your idea. Sometimes you may even want to do the exercise multiple times with different prisms and see how the results feel. For example, in this case, let's pretend it's a startup and they want to bring a program to market for the first time. And so for them, it's all about customer value. They're not worried that they can build the thing. They're just worried, are people going to buy and use our piece of software? And so they would go about prioritizing the various options. And then the step after that, an adult conversation around what is the absolute minimum that we need to start to get some feedback as to whether customers like our thing or not. And here, the thinner, the better. Now you may notice something, even though you can't read it. You can notice that in approximately the 5th column, there's a customer activity there that has no options in this first increment. Is that a mistake? Not necessarily. In this example, the thing that doesn't appear anywhere is in fact the ability to delete an email. You know, if you're a startup and you have no customers and no established base and nobody has any email in their inboxes anyhow, right? So you can, in fact, release a piece of software that doesn't allow you to delete emails just yet. If people grab onto it, use it, love it, then yes, you rush and then you build that capability afterwards. It's a trade-off, but it's a way to get feedback more quickly. Make sense? Any questions around that?
So when the team gets together to produce ideas, would it be a good idea to bring some customers or potential customers to put in some of the ideas that go here, even for getting feedback from a real prototype?
Is it ever a great idea to get more input? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, there are several pro tips that you can find on the internet. Lots of people have been trying these techniques. Something that we love to do is, even though a representative team might build the first version of the map, we love for that living document to remain in a public place. We love to cycle more people through it because the map gets richer, more sophisticated, but also has more options in it. And yes, why would we not get input from prospective customers? Absolutely.
The slide before, or 2 slides before, you're just brainstorming and you had an undifferentiated pile. How did you know which one of these undifferentiated things would turn out to be yellow, which blue, and which pink?
Absolutely. So after the brainstorming, you end up with a big pile of stickies that on the slide already had nice colors to them, but in reality, how does that work? How do you differentiate what's an option and what's an activity and what might represent the backbone? So the reality is that they emerge. Sticking with the email example, like here's how it might play out. So I might write on a sticky, I want to be able to search emails through keywords. And somebody else might say, well, I want to sort them by receive date. And somebody else will say, well, I want to sort them by a sender, for example. Well, we might realize that all of these things are about managing emails. And then we might say, all right, for the sake of keeping the big picture in mind, we'll put a managing email header, heading on top, and then all of these things, we'll treat them as options. So that's how it emerges, which is why the more ideas you have, the more people you cycle through, then you can get a clearer big picture over time. All right, now let's review why we're doing all of this as part of the refine step. And we talked about this early on. The main goal of slicing very thin increments is exactly to avoid the downfalls of big batches. We were just convinced a few minutes ago in this presentation that new great ideas come up all the time. People become really, really excited about new big ideas. They get revealed, right? We size them real quick, they bubble up at the top, and then we have a lot of angst because we can't act on them right away. Well, guess what? The thinner our increments, the more frequently we get to finish something and then decide what else to work on. That's the magic. You get to have more decision points, more flexibility, you're less anchored into your plans, you get to react to market dynamics much more quickly. Any final questions before I pass the mic? If not, I will invite Mario to walk us through the remainder of the 6R model.
Thank you, JP. So what you're seeing is a system, an engine in place that allows you to continuously adapt to the ideas that are coming from the marketplace. Because keep in mind, the reason why you want to do this is the marketplace is changing all the time. Customer needs are changing all the time. You need to have an ability to adapt. You're not necessarily going to get to the point of magic right away, but you have to start with the first increment. So in this case, we have an increment that now gets moved to realize. Realize is more or less development. It's now getting moved to a group of folks who actually participated in the refine step of cutting an increment, so they have a good idea already what work is ahead. What falls out of refine is often epics. So those options that JP talked about are epics, of which then you'd use methodologies like Scrum, XP, Kanban, and your next step would be something like, let's start grooming. Let's take those epics, break them down into user stories, let's understand them more, let's understand the business reasons behind it, some technical solutions on how to build it, you might story point size it, things like that. But those epics would make their way into your team backlogs. Okay? They'd make your way into the team backlogs as user stories, as you see here. However, sometimes an increment may be headed towards at least 2 teams, or sometimes 3. Sometimes when we cut an increment, they actually may go to more than 2 or 3 teams. And so let me ask you a question. What are some of the challenges you may see when an increment of work is going to 2 teams? Anyone? Let's have a mic. Where's the mic? So what do you think, David?
Interdependencies between the teams, especially if one team is developing infrastructure for another team.
Yep, that would be one thing. Anyone else has ideas? What challenges would you see when the work is going to 2 or more teams?
Duplication of work because of lack of communication.
There could be duplication of work because of lack of communication, dependencies.
Actually working on the highest value stuff in the right order, because if one team falls behind, they may not finish the highest priority stuff.
Yeah. So even within the increment, you should be working on similar high value work. So that way, one team is working on one piece of high value work and the other team isn't ready, which is another area you have to be mindful of, and that's, are both teams able to pull that increment in at the same time? Right? Yes?
Integration testing.
So integration testing, so anything involved with testing of the 2. So these are the things you'd have to keep in mind in an organization when an increment is going to 2 teams. And you might have, if you're using Scrum, you might have something like a Scrum of Scrums to keep all of that together. Okay? So as mentioned, in Realize is where many of you are going to be familiar with some of the Agile techniques there, such as Scrum, XP, Kanban, and so forth. And what we're trying to express to you is when you have an engine that's framed by the 6R model, you are not constrained by a specific tool, practice, concept, or technique. You can use the one that's best adapted to your organization. We're giving you some leading cutting-edge tools, practices, and concepts that seem to work to get you to that customer value-driven engine. But who knows, in a year from now, there can be a better one suited. So at this point, the 2 teams came together. They used Scrum of Scrums, they used integration testing, they kept themselves in sync, they pulled it around the same time, and they ended up with a bank app on a mobile phone that they released together into production. In release, you might be familiar with some of the latest Agile DevOps. A lot of DevOps work could be going on. Continuous integration and build is going on there. So those are some of the techniques you'd be looking at in release. And then of course from there, it moves to reflect. And in reflect is where we start to see, are we actually having people downloading the bank app? Are they actually using the bank app? Are they sharing the bank app with others? In other words, it's suggesting that they use it. Are we actually seeing transactions occur on the bank app to determine if it's the success that we think it is? And in this case, if it's a bank app, it might have only been released with one increment or one feature. If there's enough people that are using it, what might we want to think now? That maybe it is of high enough value to do a second increment. But if we learn that no one else cares about that bank app, then we can shift our attention to other high value work. Okay? So question, David.
So if we release the bank app with only one increment, it's possible that people aren't using it because that one increment by itself isn't enough. And if we had 3 increments, that they would then find that that was an attractive combination. But if we decide that nobody's using it with one increment, then we're going to shelve it because it's low value, we lose the opportunity to add the others.
Sure, so that's possible. So one of the things I hadn't mentioned in Realize, if that's Scrum, you should be doing reviews and demos. So at that point, you hopefully will have learned that if you're actually doing sprint reviews and demos with actual customers. You might have learned that they're not interested at that point. Or you might have learned they are, but then when you install it into production or put it on the App Store, that there's very few downloads. However, if you've been in touch with those customers during the demos, then now you can have a point of asking them for feedback. Okay? So the feedback loops are very, very critical in your journey. And in fact, almost anything that you do, if you don't have customer feedback loops, I always ask, if you don't have customers giving you feedback, what are you adapting to? Right? So that's why when I talk about the customer value-driven engine, it's a combination of mechanics and mindset. You have to believe in customer feedback. I'm not saying it's always easy to collect, and I'm not always saying it's easy to merge and determine what are the nuggets, but if you don't do that, you could be missing out on a lot of the very valuable pieces. So finally, as we conclude, and we're concluding on the notion of mindset, I'd like you to take the 6R model worksheet with you and start thinking about what culture and behavioral changes must occur to apply the type of mindset and practices that we've just shared with you for the customer value-driven engine. We talked about the incremental mindset. So that would be one cultural and behavioral shift. What other shifts do you think you might need in your organization to help you adapt to a model that will help you constantly change to the high value that's coming from the market, that's needed by the marketplace? And then lastly, what change might you consider doing in your organization? What one thing might you do? It could be something as simple as, I'm going to explore story mapping. I'm going to further explore cost of delay. I'm going to further explore the incremental mindset. So spend a few minutes jotting down the 6R model. If you could pair up with people as you're doing that, think about that for a minute. Think about the cultural and behavioral changes that you think would have to occur. And then again, lastly, think of one thing you're going to do from this session that you might help your own organization or you become more familiar with the concept of a customer value-driven enterprise or engine. Okay. So before we close, any remaining questions? Any remaining questions? We have a question over here.
It's a two-part question. The first part, would it be accurate to say that most of what we've heard tonight is applicable to a variety of types of products, not just software? The second part is, if true, is this being taught in business schools or in business journals as ways to develop any kind of product?
Sure. So the first question was, is this applicable to any type of work? We've actually, even at Vistaprint, we've done software work, marketing work, creative agency work, so it can apply to pretty much any type of work. Now, you may need to adapt it, and that's why the importance of the 6R model and why we're trying to basically harness you with a lot of the latest cutting-edge practices, tools, and techniques, because you need to figure out which ones are going to work better for you. And then the second is that in any of the latest like MBA and journals, this is actually very cutting edge stuff, guys. This is very cutting edge. Very few organizations are doing this yet. However, I can tell you from the consulting I've done, plus the work at Vistaprint, we know it can work. And it's really helping us align much more quickly, as well as aligning with customer value in a better way. Other questions? I see a couple over here.
So I know you talked about customer feedback at multiple points along the way. So one of the things that I do is collect customer feedback. How have you found companies effectively get that customer feedback into the Agile process or the Scrum team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the workshops that we work on is basically taking that 6R model and saying, what would be all the feedback loops along the way, from record all the way? And actually, there's feedback loops all along the way. And in fact, many of them can be customer feedback loops. There was a question to JP about, is there feedback when we cut the increment? You can actually bring in customers at that point to have them look at it. And in fact, another way to cut an increment is using the buy a feature practice, which you bring in customers and you give them each $100 and you tell them which features might they like to put their money on. And of course, like even in Reveal, when it reveals as the highest value idea, you may bring in a couple of customers to see, does this align? If you already have a customer advisory board, you could do that. And there's a lot of different techniques. One of the articles that I've written in my blog is called the Customer Feedback Vision. So that gives you an idea, framework of all the different types of feedback loops, the rate of feedback, and things like that that can help you hone your product to ensure it's more customer value focused.
Would you apply any modifications to this model if you are working in a startup versus established company that is trying to launch a new product?
Yeah. So the question, should this be adapted? The short answer is this should be adapted for every company. And what I mean by that is I've been applying this type of model over the last about 4 to 5 years in very large companies like Walmart, to Vistaprint, to very small companies like edX and so forth. So it can apply, and the reason why our goal is to harness you with all the latest tools, practices, and techniques is different ones may be different depending on the size of the company, the nature of the work, and things like that. I would still go through each R because the idea still needs to be recorded, whether it's a canvas or it could just simply be a card. It still needs to be revealed and prioritized. It could be very simply done without cost of delay if you don't want, or with. It should still have an increment cut to test something out, even if it's a simple prototype. And of course, it has to be realized, development, and released and reflected upon. You just may do it a little differently. But just be aware of that, and that there isn't just a way to do it. It depends. There's always latest Agile practices, tools, and techniques that you can apply that can help you adapt. Okay, we'll take one more question, John, and then we'll have to wrap up.
You mentioned the enterprise Kanban. You mentioned the enterprise Kanban board. How does that fit into the 6R model?
So the enterprise Kanban board is the board where the ideas go in the first place to be prioritized. And if you are a mid-sized or large company, you should most likely have an enterprise Kanban because you'll probably have loads of backlogs. But then the question is how do I know the work in my backlog is connected to the high-value work at the enterprise level? And that's where the enterprise Kanban should live. It should be storing those ideas, and at some point, they should be connected from backlog back up to the enterprise Kanban. Okay, with that, on behalf of David Grabel, JP Beaudry, and I, Mario Moreira, we thank you for this wonderful session. And also, if you are interested in more of this material, we actually have books at a session price of only $25 and normally $40 on Amazon. So again, thank you all very much, and we really appreciate the time and attention you've given us. Okay. So before we close, any remaining questions? Any remaining questions? We have a question over here.
It's a two-part question. The first part, would it be accurate to say that most of what we've heard tonight is applicable to a variety of types of products, not just software? The second part is, if true, is this being taught in business schools or in business journals as ways to develop any kind of product?
Sure. So the first question was, is this applicable to any type of work? We've actually, even at Vistaprint, we've done software work, marketing work, creative agency work, so it can apply to pretty much any type of work. Now, you may need to adapt it, and that's why the importance of the 6R model and why we're trying to basically harness you with a lot of the latest cutting edge practices, tools, and techniques, because you need to figure out which ones are going to work better for you. And then the second is that in any of the latest like MBA and journals, this is actually very cutting edge stuff, guys. This is very cutting edge. Very few organizations are doing this yet. However, I can tell you from the consulting I've done, plus the work at Vistaprint, we know it can work. And it's really helping us align much more quickly, as well as aligning with customer value in a better way. Other questions? I see a couple over here.
So I know you talked about customer feedback at multiple points along the way. So one of the things that I do is collect customer feedback. How have you found companies effectively get that customer feedback into the Agile process or the Scrum team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the workshops that we work on is basically taking that 6R model and saying, what would be all the feedback loops along the way, from record all the way? And actually, there's feedback loops all along the way. And in fact, many of them can be customer feedback loops. There was a question to JP about, is there feedback when we cut the increment? You can actually bring in customers at that point to have them look at it. And in fact, another way to cut an increment is using the buy a feature practice, which you bring in customers and you give them each $100 and you tell them which features might they like to put their money on. And of course, like even in Reveal, when it reveals as the highest value idea, you may bring in a couple of customers to see, does this align? If you already have a customer advisory board, you could do that. And there's a lot of different techniques. One of the articles that I've written in my blog is called the Customer Feedback Vision. So that gives you an idea, framework of all the different types of feedback loops, the rate of feedback, and things like that that can help you hone your product to ensure it's more customer value focused.
Would you apply any modifications to this model if you are working in a startup versus established company that is trying to launch a new product?
Yeah. So the question, should this be adapted? The short answer is this should be adapted for every company. And what I mean by that is I've been applying this type of model over the last about 4 to 5 years in very large companies like Walmart, to Vistaprint, to very small companies like edX and so forth. So it can apply, and the reason why our goal is to harness you with all the latest tools, practices, and techniques is different ones may be different depending on the size of the company, the nature of the work, and things like that. I would still go through each R, because the idea still needs to be recorded, whether it's a canvas or it could just simply be a card. It still needs to be revealed and prioritized. It could be very simply done without cost of delay if you don't want, or with. It should still have an increment cut to test something out, even if it's a simple prototype. And of course, it has to be realized, development, and released and reflected upon. You just may do it a little differently. But just be aware of that, and that there isn't just a way to do it. It depends. There's always latest Agile practices, tools, and techniques that you can apply that can help you adapt. Okay, we'll take one more question, John, and then we'll have to wrap up.
At the beginning, you mentioned the enterprise Kanban. You mentioned the enterprise Kanban board. How does that fit into the 6R model?
So the enterprise Kanban board is the board where the ideas go in the first place to be prioritized. And if you're a mid-size or large company, you should most likely have an enterprise Kanban, because you'll probably have loads of backlogs. But then the question is how do I know the work in my backlog is connected to the high-value work at the enterprise level? And that's where the enterprise Kanban should live. It should be storing those ideas, and at some point, they should be connected from backlog back up to the enterprise Kanban. Okay, with that, on behalf of David Grabel, JP Beaudry, and I, Mario Moreira, we thank you for this wonderful session. And also, if you are interested in more of this material, we actually have books at a session price of only $25 and normally $40 on Amazon. So again, thank you all very much, and we really appreciate the time and attention you've given us.